Good morning. Welcome to the first of my updates on writing my retelling series. So, I decided to start a fantasy writer's tag to go through our current works in progress. I did a video once on my current project, Neverland, and I'm going to be going through how that project has changed since I started it and reintroduced it. So, the first question is, what inspired this story? Well, this started in 2020. I was thinking of retelling, and I had just written my short story collection. One of those was about a girl who was a pirate on a flying skyship. And since I was thinking retellings, I thought, what fairy tale does that most fit? I came up with Peter Pan, and I came up with a story about Captain Hook's daughter. At the same time, I also had two other ideas for fairy tale retellings: a cyberpunk Wizard of Oz story and a story about three sisters, Snow White, Rose Red, and Briar Black. At first, those seemed like three separate stories that I would write as cute fairy tales. But then what changed is that the idea started to snowball. It went from three individual stories to being spun into what would be a 5-book series, possibly 6 books. So, how did this happen? First thing was that I got stuck on Pinterest looking through pictures that inspired character ideas, and I came up with a bunch of different characters who, since I was still thinking retellings, I kept assigning to fairy tale characters. So I ended up putting my ideas for these three stories into a timeline. The Snow White, Rose Red, and Briar Black idea was first. It seemed like an old-timey fairy tale kind of story. So that was first. The Neverland idea, something happening in the background of that was that the world was moving from sailing ships to engine-powered ships. So I thought, oh, technology is advancing. And then, of course, later with the cyberpunk Wizard of Oz. So what could I use to fill in the blanks between those stories in this timeline? And I ended up with a whole world developing from that. And from there, I also took inspiration from the TV show Once Upon a Time, which has a lot of the same character playing different fairy tale roles. So I thought, how can I make my characters multi-purpose? How can they have a thread going through the entire series? And what developed from there is I ended up showing how my characters that I created will become the fairy tale figures that we know. So, like with the Snow White, Rose Red, and Briar Black idea, what developed from that was that Briar Black would become Maleficent, Snow White would become the evil queen, Rose Red would become Robin Hood or a Robin Hood type figure. But right now, the focus is going to be on my Neverland story, which is my current work in progress. So, what did I do from there? I outlined the entire series in broad strokes, writing out each fairy tale that I was taking from and what were the key elements and seeing how I could put those into the plot elements that I already had. And after that, I plotted the entire thing from the antagonist perspective. Each of these books would have a different main character, and so I couldn't follow the whole series from one specific character. So I followed from the antagonist to create the thread that ties everything together. And from there, I was able to figure out how different plot points that I had in my head. I knew I wanted these things to happen, but I couldn't figure out why they would be happening until I looked at the entire thing from the antagonist. What were they doing that was triggering events that would then affect the protagonist of my different story and tie everything together? And I really want to do a video where I go through some of the plotting methods that I use. That's for another day. After that, I made a list of every fairy tale that I know, nursery rhymes as well, and I was thinking, what elements can I take from each of? I looked up the origin of those fairy tales and nursery rhymes to see if it could add a bit of world building here, a bit of lore there for the background. And I'm very curious when I write these, what people are going to pick up on in regards to which pieces of the original fairy tales and nursery rhymes end up in the story. And the next thing that I did was writing out backstories, not just for my main characters, but for the side characters that I had taken from these other fairy tales and nursery rhymes. What were their backstories there, and figuring out where did they come from, what did they want, how would the side characters affect the main character. I created family trees for some of them to see how people are connected and related. And I created some history and lore for the entire world. It's a whole thing that I'll make a video on sometime. So from there, I have a series overview. The overall series takes place in a world of magical creatures and humans, like Carnival Row, and we'll go through a mashup of fairy tale origin stories, like Once Upon a Time, with a backdrop of kingdoms in conflict over a magical resource, like Dune. with a politically ruthless villain with their own family drama and trauma, like Rain, and a strong focus on relationships between siblings and found family, like Arcane, with the various protagonists. So I hope that catches your interest, and I'm going to be talking specifically about the first book in the series, Neverland. So, question two: who is the main character? Developing my character started with these three pictures that I found on Instagram, and it started with this one on the far left. She became a character in my short story collection. I was writing short stories based off of picture prompts, and she was one of them, and that short story developed into Neverland. Her birth name was Jacqueline. She's about 17 or 18. She was adopted into the Skyfarers and was given the name Kala to blend in. She is stubborn, suspicious, and independent. She was born on the mainland, abandoned by her mother, taken on a secret voyage to find Neverland with her father. Disaster happened there, and she ended up being adopted by a Skyfarer captain who saved her and changed her name to help her hide and blend in there for reasons we will discover as we read the story. Her closest relationships are with her adopted siblings. There are some dysfunctions in their relationship. Actually, let me talk a bit more about the relationships with her sisters. We have this one in the middle. Her younger sister Kim was also adopted. She was saved off of a shipwreck and has her own story that we will get some details of within the book. Her sister Mariji, who's about the same age as her, is their father's only blood daughter, and their relationship is a lot like Nebula and Gamora in Guardians of the Galaxy. Take from that what you will. Okay, question three: the world and conflict. Some tidbits about the world. Neverland, the mythical magical island that we all love from our childhood, believed to be myth by the mainland, but known by the Skyfarers to be a very real place, almost impossible to get to, and even more difficult to leave. The Skyfarers make their homes among the floating isles. Each clan has their own recognizable trait. The mainland has tried to conquer the Isles before in history. In the present day, they have alliances due to the mainland's reliance on skyfarers for travel, trade, and for harvesting dust, which is the magical resource of this world. So, what is dust? Going into the magic system of this world a bit. Dust is a natural magical resource in this world. Dust falls occur over the floating isles and the Leviathan Sea. The Skyfarers with their ships are able to harvest dust and then trade it to the mainland. And it's used for providing power, medicine, for inventions, currency. Very important to this world, obviously. So, three rules of dust. Dust takes the properties of a thing and makes it more so. Dust is drawn to dust, and iron can contain dust. So, in building the magic system, I made up those three rules and then I extrapolated from there how they would work within this world. I'll do a whole video on the magic. Question four: the pitch and comp titles. So, my short pitch for this is that Captain Hook's daughter must protect a fairy and save Neverland from pirates. The longer pitch is Kala, the adopted daughter of a Skyfarer captain, is tasked with ferrying a child across the treacherous passage. When they are pursued by an enemy vessel and she discovers that the girl is a fairy, Kala has to face her own past to keep the girl's magic out of enemy hands and take her to the only place that she'll be safe, Neverland. The tagline I have for that is, do you know why they call it Neverland? Because you should never land there. So, trying to give some comparable titles for that. In a world of floating islands and flying ships, an untrusting noble girl turned skyfarer, like Elizabeth Swann meets Jack Sparrow, must protect a feisty young fairy, Tinkerbell, from pirates. She leads her own crew on a treacherous journey, like in the movie Sinbad, racing against their pursuers to get to safety. If she fails, the fairy's powerful magic, which may be the key to finding the source of dust itself, could fall into enemy hands and endanger their entire way of life. Question five: genres, tropes, and target audience. So the genre for this is Sky Pirate Adventure Fantasy Fairytale Retelling. A bit of a mouthful, but that pretty much covers it. The target audience is YA, for fans of the TV show Once Upon a Time, for fans of On Wings of Ash and Dust by Brittany Wang. She was also an inspiration to me for developing this series. I actually did a talk with her on writing a serial for my writing group when I first got this idea. I will link that video below as well. So, some of the conflict and tropes within the series and within Neverland. We have fairy tale mashups and origin stories, flying ships and floating islands, a female main character who will stab you, adopted siblings and sibling rivalries, best friend betrayals, rivals to enemies, magic swords, not so sweet fairies and mermaids, giant sea creatures, and an epic world with deep lore. So, my question for everyone watching this video, can you guess who the overall antagonist will be? There is a bad guy behind the other bad guy. Who do you think is the top of the food chain? So, that is my reintroduction to my retelling series. I started this idea in 2020 and it ended up taking much longer than I thought because it snowballed into this entire series idea, which means what I had already written had to be completely rewritten to accommodate that, to change how some of my characters would be carried out throughout the entire series, some that I only had in Neverland. I rethought how to integrate them into the entire series. So some of them, like I said, play more than one fairy tale role, and I'm very happy with what I have outlined, how the characters I had isolated in Neverland now have threads going through the story, how I was able to integrate how their relationships tie everything together. I really want to do a video on how I plotted it. Sounds like fun. And so, yes, thank you for listening. My short story collection, one of which inspired the story that the story that I'm working on now that blew up into this series, is The Other Side of the Sky, available on Amazon, link in the description below. So thank you for listening to my rambling presentation, trying to present my thoughts on this series that has been very much engaging for me as I am trying to build a whole world and keep it all together. And I would very much love to hear your thoughts. Any questions that you have about the series, any feedback that you have so far, I would love to hear it. Please leave a comment below. Have a good day. Bye.